Well, good afternoon and good morning, and welcome to Manheim Insider. My name is Pete Raposo. I oversee dealer sales for Manheim, and first off, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know we're all busy, and it does mean a lot for us that you take this time out, and hopefully you have a lot that comes out of this call today. Obviously, this has been a very unique year for us collectively, not only from a business perspective, but our families as well. And I hope that everybody in this call has managed to stay safe and healthy, and hopefully what we've seen in the business the last 90 days has been good for you and your dealerships out there. And I think where we are today versus where we thought we'd be 4 or 5 months ago is a drastically different position. So hopefully that's helped out. Our partnership with each of you it's critical for us to understand really the needs of your business, and we want to provide you all the right data. Obviously, you're experts in your field, you watch the market, you utilize data that's out there, but we want to make sure we can provide some of the insights and innovations that we have to help move business ahead for you. Obviously, we like to connect normally in person at events, meetings, visiting you at the office, seeing you at the auction. But this year's been a challenge there. So we did want to get these Manheim Insider calls together to make sure we didn't lose connectivity, make sure that we were still providing the insights and the information about the market for you all to absorb. Today, we're going to have Kevin Chartier, who's going to share the most up-to-date market trends and insights, along with the key takeaways to help with the future business strategy of your dealerships. Alan Lang is going to provide an update on our marketplace operations and ways we're continuing to make doing business in the marketplace easier at our locations out in the field. And Jennifer Heiser and Veronica Tai from our product team are going to share a couple of new product advancements as we start to really look at needs of the client and ways we can help doing business with Manheim easier for you all. One thing to note, we're going to monitor the chat section really closely as we go through. If you have any questions, please use that function. There's a questions tab on the control panel, and you can submit those questions. In some cases, we'll be able to respond right in that chat function. Otherwise, we've got about 15 minutes carved out at the end of the call to make sure we can answer any questions that you all may have. So please don't be shy. This webinar will also be recorded, and we are going to email it out to you by the end of the week, so you'll have access to the information that's inside of it. So if you're unable to take notes, we will get you this information out by week's end. And with that, I'd like to introduce Kevin Chartier. Kevin?
Thanks, Pete. Much appreciated. Well, you did point out as you started this whole thing out that it really has been a tale of two worlds here as we went into the COVID crisis and then coming out. I'm kind of reminded a little bit of the old Grateful Dead song, "What a long, strange trip it's been." So with that, we're going to try and dive into some of the key market trends, and we'll see where we're headed as we head into the fourth quarter of the year. So the key storylines for us as we look at what's been happening is obviously the government stimulus programs were unprecedented in history and drove an incredible V-shaped recovery. Both volumes and values came out of a very, very steep hole that we saw in COVID, and we'll look at some of the data as we go through this. So retail sales now are slowing down and kind of going back to what I would consider to be a more normal pace after a torrid recovery here in June and July. Inventories are normalizing a little bit on the retail side, but remain extremely tight on the wholesale auction side. And we'll look at some of that data as we go into that. So resale values now appear to be reaching their peak for most of the segments, and we'll take a look at some of the segments that are still rising. And then we'll finish up with a quick look at where retail prices are going in response to wholesale. So with that, let's kick on into the retail sales trends. What we have here is on the left in the green section there is a segment of dealers that we pull out of our vAuto databases. It's really concentrated a little bit more in the larger and franchise dealer segments of the business. And on the right-hand side in the reddish section is a dealer subset that we pull out of DealerTrack, which has a little bit stronger representation of some of the smaller independents. On the far left is the rolling 7-day same-store retail sales, the green line being last year, the blue line being this year. And you certainly see in the pre-COVID phase there that we're having a very strong spring market, followed by the COVID crash, a really robust recovery through June and July, and now we seem to be kind of normalizing and flattening out. When we look at kind of each monthly segment here over the past 90 days or so. You look at that June sales pace, up 16% year over year, signs of an incredibly strong recovery coming out of that COVID hole. Lasting pretty well into July, and July having a pretty good year-over-year growth rate at 7.3%. But now as we look at August and we average out August for the full month, down just a little shade under 1%. But if we isolate to the final week of August, you can see we're down 1.7% year over year. That down 1.7% is fairly representative of what we've seen so far in the first couple of weeks of September. We have a little bit later holiday this year than we had last year, so some of those year-over-year comparisons are a little skewed. But in general, we're starting to bounce around now pretty close to where we were at this time last year. When we look at the middle graph and we can kind of see the year-over-year percentages, we're really shaping up to have now what's emerging as the fourth phase of the year. We started out the first phase, that very strong spring, up 5% year over year. The COVID crash down by 35%. The recovery window there, where you see the big hump back up over prior year levels, averaging out to about 6% year over year. And now, since sort of the last week or so of July, we've really been kind of back to what I would call a normal sales pace. Similar trends when you look on the right-hand side that include the smaller independent mix, very much the same in the spring and in that COVID crash window in terms of the percentages, but a weaker recovery for that segment of dealers in the recovery window. So, and certainly a little bit weaker as we look at what's happening in the latest and the greatest. So after a robust year-over-year growth in July and June, we're starting to see the sales pace cool off here in August and September, and we're heading into what I would call the fourth phase, which is post-recovery. When we look at the retail days supply on the left-hand side, you can see going into COVID fairly close to prior year levels, then the big run-up in COVID, and really been running on relatively light supplies relative to that retail demand. So day supply running below prior year levels, still a little bit low, below prior year levels as we exited August. But as we start to look at the September numbers and we continue to see retail slow down a little bit, we're really seeing that normalize quite well. But when we look on the right-hand side there, and you kind of take a look at the ages of the vehicles, you can see that the near new segments, the 1 and 3 year olds, 1 to 3 year olds, is really pretty much back to kind of normal levels there above the 40-day supply. We're still relatively tight on the 5-year-olds and older. And when we get into taking a look at the values and the value trends, I think you're going to see some of that supply shortage on some of those older vehicles influencing those values. When we look at the whole marketplace as a whole, while day supply is kind of normalizing, we're still running about 10% lower than we were last year in terms of just the pure volume of vehicles listed in inventory. Flipping to the new vehicle side, because unlike any recession prior to this, we have this gigantic loss of production capacity concurrent with the COVID lockdowns. When we look at that top graph on the left there, you can just see the massive shutdown, unprecedented in history in terms of lost new vehicle production. Nice recovery in June and July, so we're kind of getting back up to those normal levels. But that huge loss of production is having a pretty significant impact on new vehicle inventories at the dealership level. When we look at the graph on the right, and we look at the listings year over year, that blue line being this year, the gray being last year, you can see that despite the fact that we're starting to get some production recovery, the overall volume of new vehicle inventory at dealerships is still down about 33% versus prior year. Now, sales are down a little bit versus last year as well. Sales running down somewhere in that 15 to 20% range, but inventory down at 33% means that that production hole is still having a very, very big impact on new vehicle inventories at the dealerships. And while production is catching up, it's going to take a while for us to fill that quote unquote COVID hole. So our expectation is that we're probably going to see continued shortages in those popular models and popular equipment packages, and that's likely to persist all the way through Q4. When we look at day supply and a couple of the key segments here, we're looking at sedans, SUVs, and pickups on the left-hand side, new vehicle day supply, right-hand side, just to kind of get a feel for the overall marketplace and how a consumer might see that marketplace as they come in. The thing that jumps off to me is the red lines on both charts when we look at the pickup day supply. Prior to COVID, pickups tended to have a higher day supply in both new and used than the other segments, albeit not very much more in the used segment, but certainly higher. And coming out of COVID, they've been in fairly short supply all the way through. And they continue to be in very, very short supply now. So I expect that we're going to continue to see that to be an issue as we go forward. It's going to be a challenge for consumers and dealers both to find the vehicles that they're looking for, in particular in that new car, or in that pickup truck segment. So now we're going to take and flip over to the wholesale side of the house and take a look at what's happening from an inventory perspective at the auction. On the top there is just the commercial inventory. That makes up the bulk of the inventory we usually see on ground at the auction. And you can see the big run up in inventory as we went through the COVID crisis, followed by a very orderly liquidation of that inventory to the point now where we've basically liquidated a little over half of that excess inventory. We're down now 48,000 units year over year, and we have the lowest commercial inventory levels at auction that we've seen in several years. When I look at the sub-segments of types of cars, I want to draw your attention first and foremost to that bottom left graph. There's been a lot of press and concern surrounding the impacts on the rental car business and the need to have massive defleeting. And you can certainly see the big hump there in the COVID window where that defleeting occurred. But it has been a very, very orderly liquidation of that excess rental car volume. And in fact, when we look at it now, we're 75,000 units lower than we were at the peak. And we're even now down 2,000 units versus where we were last year at this time. So in my book, when I take a look at this, the rental defleeting impacts on the marketplace, that appears to be in the rearview mirror for us now. It has been very orderly, and it's had almost no impact whatsoever on resale values. So really quite a nice and neat orderly liquidation of that excess inventory. We take a look in the middle there at the captive finance. That's mostly the off-lease stuff. And you can see that we, again, are at some of the lowest levels we've seen in several years. And on the right side, the bank inventory, which is representative mostly of repossessions. And again, significantly below where we were last year at this time. And we do have significant volumes of repos that have been delayed due to the COVID and some of the actions that have had to be taken in response to the virus. And speaking of some of those delays, we're going to take a look at two of the key subsegments for the commercial inventories. On the left there is the repossessions, and the gray background is repossession check-ins that we've seen into the marketplace from 2019. The blue line is representative of what we've been seeing this year. And you can kind of see prior to COVID there that the blue line was running ahead of 2019. So we had ample supplies of repos heading into that strong spring market. And certainly about 6 or 7% more than what we had been seeing last year. So the red dotted line represents, hey, if that pace had kept up through the year and we did not have COVID, how many repos would we have expected to see come back into the marketplace, and when would they come back? And then, of course, we kind of take a look at what actually happened in the blue line versus that red line and take a measure of how many repos we can kind of estimate have been delayed due to forbearances, the government stimulus money, helping people to make good on their accounts when previously they maybe have not been able to, and kind of get an idea just how many of these repos are in the pipeline for the future. Based on that, our guesstimate is there's about 350,000 repos that have been delayed so far, and that number continues to grow week in and week out. Our expectation is we will probably not start to see many of those repos hit the market much before the middle or end of Q4. And quite frankly, many of them probably will not hit the marketplace until 2021. So we're going to see some below normal inbound volumes to auction on the repo front all the way through the end of the year. When we flip over and look at the leases, we take a look at the listings out on Viato in terms of how many 3-year-olds are out there and what percentage of those 3-year-olds are made up of lease vehicles. And you can kind of see that big COVID hole again, where a number of people delayed making their lease termination decisions. But that seems to be over now, and we're now running well ahead of the pre-COVID trend as many of those folks are coming back into the market. The interesting thing when we look at this is those vehicles are, for the most part, being purchased through upstream and gross payoff channels, meaning they don't hit the general market like they have in the past. And that's primarily due to the big run up in values and the fact that many of these cars are now in an equity position. Again, that's a trend that we expect to see continuing through the end of the year. So the volume of off-lease vehicles coming into the marketplace that will hit the auction will also be below prior year levels for an extended period of time. So we think we're going to see very weak inbound volume through the end of the year, which will keep auction inventories extremely tight. All right, now we're going to take a look at some of the pricing trends, and this has been the wild ride we've been on through the year. Top left there is MMR retention, which is really just actual auction prices as a percentage of MMR. See, in the spring, we had a nice spring run up in values, followed by that COVID crash again. And then the unprecedented 17 weeks in a row where we saw rising resale values. And again, as we come out of August, you can see the very last week of August there, finished up at 100% MMR retention, which basically says that the resale values on average were equal to MMR. So the long run up in resale values, when we look at the market as a whole, appears to be coming to an end. On the right-hand side, we're taking a look at just how influential that run up in values has been on a 3-year-old vehicle. And you can see in the spring, we're up there at 19.3-ish, and we're now up almost to 21,000. Looking at a year-over-year basis, that's about 11, 12% higher than we were last year at this time. But again, it's starting to plateau and flatten out. Down on the bottom in that gray section is really what I want to draw people's attention to, because it is two different worlds, so to speak. You'll recall we looked at the retail day supply on the 5 to 10-year-olds being really, really tight. And of course, that's being reflected in the prices. When we look at week over week resale values on those 5 to 10-year-old vehicles, those vehicles are still seeing price appreciation. So while the market as a whole is slowing down and starting to taper off, those older vehicles, because they're in short supply, continue to see some, fairly robust price increases. When we look at the near new segments, those are the segments that are now kind of, either dropping a little bit below prior year, or 100% of MMR to right at 100% of MMR. So it's from here on out, we're really expecting a more seasonal type pattern. And at some point, we'll start to see those 5 to 10-year-olds come down, but maybe not quite yet. So now we're taking a look at how the retail prices are reacting to that big run up and run down in wholesale values. The blue line on the top is the retail average selling prices for non-luxury on the left, luxury on the right. The green line is the wholesale values that are occurring in the marketplace at the same time. And the gold bars are what we call the 6-week lag, which is just kind of a measure of the distance between the blue line and the green line, only lags 6 weeks apart. So being reflective of the fact that I acquire a car today and I may not retail it on average for 6 weeks. So it kind of gives us a feel for impacts on go forward margins, whether they're normal, rising, falling, and those sorts of things. And you can kind of see that we are now starting to see retail prices outpace wholesale for the first time since the COVID crisis kind of kicked in and crashed those wholesale values. So on the non-luxury, up 851 in the past month, while wholesale was up 450, causing the margins, to kind of depress a little bit. But they're coming off a really, really high historical levels post-COVID. And on the non-luxury side, margins to me, when I look at them on a percentage basis, have really come back to what I would call normal. So the big run up after COVID, now we're heading back to normal. On the luxury side, it's a little bit of a different story. We've seen the wholesale values running up faster than retail for quite a while now. And certainly we didn't see the big run up in those spreads between the green and red line that we saw in the non-luxury market. So when we look at those margin spreads right now, the spreads are now kind of drifting below normal and even below 15%. So it's starting to feel a little bit like it's difficult to hold a good price in that luxury market unless that retail blue line continues to rise while the wholesale line kind of flattens out. We may start to see some less and less demand in the luxury market in terms of buying some of those cars at these prices. So what we're seeing at the end of the day is retail spreads kind of returning to normal after a nice little bump post-COVID. So let's just kind of summarize. When we look at it, government stimulus drove an incredible V-shaped recovery. It was historic in every way, shape, and form in terms of volume and values. We are now seeing that retail volume demand slowly cooling down as those stimulus programs expire. Inventories on the retail side are normalizing, but on the wholesale side are extremely tight and will likely stay that way for a while. And our resale values are beginning to show signs of plateauing or even slowly drifting into a normal downward pattern at this time of the year. So when we look at all those factors and we look forward, what is our expectation as we head out? We really see that a second crash is very, very unlikely. A second round of government stimulus is possible. And if it does, it might actually cause a second run up, much more likely than a second run down that looks anything remotely close to what we saw in April. So we kind of, at this point, expect August to be the cyclical peak, followed by a more normal seasonal pattern as we come out of this. Supply shortages are going to continue to be the key trend, both on the new car side and on the wholesale auction side. I think it's going to be difficult to find some of the more popular product at reasonable prices. And then when we look at the rental car liquidation and Hertz bankruptcies and those things, it has been very orderly and has not been problematic in any way. And then lastly, it's our expectation that we really have seen resale values hit their peak overall, much more so in the near new segments than some of those older segments. But the older segments should probably be reaching their peak pretty quickly, and then we'll settle into a more normal depreciation pattern as we head through the rest of the year. So with that, I'm going to hand the ball off to Patrick Brennan and let him take you through a little bit of an operational update.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Before I turn it over to Alan, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to give you guys some thoughts and ask for your continued feedback. Everybody has been fantastic. We made some really big decisions almost 6 months ago to the day, 6 months ago to the week for sure, that we had to make really big decisions due to COVID. And we shut some auctions down. We took the rest of them digital. Since then, we have been methodically making decisions to bring things back online. And Alan's going to go through exactly where we are with regard to in-lane bidding and office access and other things. But my role here today, too, is, again, to say thank you for everything you all have done for us, the perseverance, the flexibility, again, the feedback. We hear you. We are listening very, very closely. I know there's probably going to be at least one question before we get off this call about whether or not we are running or anticipate running vehicles through the lanes in the physical lanes. Again, I can tell you we are open to that idea. We are putting plans together as we speak, as we go through these calls and listen to our clients on how to do that, how to do it safely, where to do it, what segments to do it in. Listening to our clients is going to give us the answers that we need. I know that there's a lot of auctions out there that have been doing it from day one, and others have joined in since then as their local pandemic levels have allowed them to, or their own decisions have allowed them to. And then there's others in the industry that are putting their foot in the ground and really are reluctant to it. Our thoughts are, let's listen to our clients and let's make decisions based on safety and science, and we'll end up in the right spot. So hopefully that answers your question about that, but we're more than willing to dive into it deeper if we need to. So I'll turn it over to Alan. Again, thank you all for taking the time today and listening to us. And Alan, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Well, good afternoon. Thanks for your time. I'll try to be brief. Just a quick operational update before I do. Certainly miss a lot of faces. Wish we were out there. Hopefully soon enough we'll be doing dinner. We'll be able to shake some hands in lanes and get back to some kind of normal routine. So know that we're here to support. From all of us, the operators who maybe you've not been able to get out to see and have been working so tirelessly. We thank them, and general managers, their staffs. It's certainly been a long up and down roller coaster this summer. So, and thank you all, Patrick said, for your patience and feedback. It's been very valuable. Listen, we've been very, very transparent about, our defined process and intentional approach. I've said it before, but we have made great progress moving forward over the last few months, and continue to do. Offices still remain closed for transactions and things that you do maybe daily and interacting with our teams. A lot of that reasoning, listen, we've asked for our teams to work from home as much as possible, that are not, what I would call essential to be there for their safety. And these locations are minimally staffed on site. It doesn't mean that we don't have teams working behind the scenes, and just like I am now working from home. And for the time being, that's kind of the plan. We have reopened office access for our commercial clients. I know some of you all may hear that, wonder why can't we go in? These were dedicated offices that have been in place in some locations a period of time. They were really there so they could get back into the locations, really working, in an isolated area, being able to conduct and get inventory ready for sale on the commercial side, where it's quality checks and ensuring that cars are flowing through the way that they need to. So a little bit of background there. As far as reopening, we're up at 61 locations. I think the last time we spoke, we were around 40. So we've made great progress there, as we've seen a lot of the mandates and restrictions and lifted and pandemic levels improve. We do have plans to reopen most of our facilities that remain over the next 2-3 weeks. Several are opening this week, including the ones that you see on the screen. And then we've got a couple that are still lingering out there. New Mexico, Hawaii still have some pretty stringent mandates in place. A quick update with the Florida locations. All of those locations will fall in line here over the next week. So that was some late breaking news. We weren't able to update for those of you all who prefer to buy in Florida. Listen, the digital blocks have gone well. The simulcast sales have gone well. Patrick's already touched on evaluating running cars. At the end of the day, our goal is to provide a platform that is useful for the buyers, their preference, whether it's staying at home or in their offices, or getting out and trying to do it all in one fell swoop. So, we're going to be very careful about how we continue to get things aligned. I think we've got a good plan, but we're going to listen to you guys. Again, more to come probably over the next 3 to 4 weeks on what the options look like for running cars and where, and those types of things. So feedback is going to be something that's going to be critical to that. So maybe we can just touch on, just final few things. The capacity and organization, certainly come a long way. We experienced the furlough impacts early on to keep the lots somewhat organized, managing through record inventories. Happy to say that the most part, everybody's back in good orderly fashion, offering all of our services, reconditioning and whatnot, and lot operations. I would say that we did have 3,500 employees impacted. A lot of that was in the driver pool. You'll hear some of that. The transparent answer is that we had to make some tough decisions in markets where the labor was just not needed based on the current circumstances, and we were able to find some more efficient ways of operating the business. So a little bit of impact there, but you should not be feeling that as a customer in terms of the overall experience that you're seeing when you're attending or transacting in any of our locations. Lastly, just a few enhancements we've been really focused on. Auctioneer view, more so just for knowledge. We spent the last several weeks with the team putting together adding flexibility, I'll call it, and consistency to our auctioneers are able to now view a lot of the pertinent information all in one stop. They're able to improve some of the latency issues that we were having. this is as we found some of our auctioneers that are preferred weren't able to maybe travel, so that some of them are able to do it remotely now. This was allowed us to do that. We've entered into the virtual block specialist, kind of our piece around getting the best of the block clerks there to work in tandem with our auctioneers. It's allowed a lot of flexibility for that workforce, as you can imagine. So our goals are to continue to be consistent, from coast to coast, improve the experience for the seller on the block. Working in tandem with the auction is the biggest piece. And lastly, just the remote seller. I mean, we thank you. We've heard great feedback for those who've chosen to use that tool. It's been in place for a while. If there's feedback that you feel like it was needed, please send it our way. So far, it's been all positive, and we hope that as your teams and yourselves are able to utilize some of the remote selling tools, and that this is certainly one of the mechanisms we're happy to provide. So with that, we're open for questions. We've got the RVPs on the call. If there's any specific, you can enter into the questions. Pete can certainly address those as we get later to call, and we'll be sure to make sure we address those. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer and Veronica. Ladies.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it. So we are excited to share with you today a quick overview of a couple things. First of all, simulcast and also vehicle release. So by way of simulcast, we now have more vehicle information and some additional enhancements to make it easier for you to view cars and to bid online. Just recently, this new simulcast experience was made available to all Manheim users, and the updates that have been incorporated were directly requested by dealers through many feedback sessions. So lots of conversations, feedback sessions, anytime that we are with you at the auction or at a conference, we're getting feedback. And you told us that you wanted greater visibility of lights and odometer, you wanted larger photos, you wanted quicker access to the CRs with fewer clicks from the simulcast experience. And one of the most requested features was the new run list. And you can see that on the right-hand side. What you can't see here is the ability to scroll up and down to see the entire sale. Instead of just seeing the next 10 cars, now you can see all the cars in the sale. So when you go back and forth through that sale, you can click on those cars and get more information, easily review any car within the sale and make the decisions before you're buying and bidding. The new simulcast experience is really intended to simplify that buying for you, and we want to hear from you. Are we hitting the mark? Do you have any further questions, suggestions? And if you do, there's a couple ways you can get those to us. First of all, there's an option on manheim.com to click the feedback link. And alternatively, you can also always contact your sales rep, and they can get those questions or feedback to us. So take a look, check it out. For those of you who sell with us, we're also going to be introducing some enhancements to the remote seller experience later this year. So we look forward to coming back and talking to you about those. And Veronica, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I'm excited to share some changes that are coming to gate passes. For so long at Manheim, we've really been focused on gate passes, the release of vehicles that are actually on Manheim property. As we start to see the trend of more digital sales and vehicles that are being sold off property or off site, and we're starting to incorporate more of that eligibility and logic so that we can provide self-service vehicle releases through manheim.com. So the terminology is changing too, from just gate pass to vehicle release, more inclusive of those lots where we may not have an actual gate and a Manheim person there releasing the vehicle. So this will have some terminology changes across manheim.com. We will be a little more clear about saying vehicles are ready for pickup or ready for seller release in the cases where they're off property. And that means consistency when you're looking for a vehicle that you need to pick up as a buyer, or as a seller you're looking to release. Now you don't have to look through your emails or call the auction and say, is it time that I can go get this vehicle? So a lot more consistency there for your Manheim Express and your OVE purchases as well. This is coming at the end of September. And with that, I think I turn it back over to Peter.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much, Jennifer and Veronica. And we're going to jump right into the questions. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we do have a couple loaded in. Before I jump into the questions themselves, I think I can, Joe Laham, thank you very much for your comment on condition reports. And one thing I'll say to that is we are very aware that the condition reports are a cornerstone to digital sales as well. So we're going to continue to invest and improve in that area. It's a major focal point for us. So I agree with your sentiments, though. David asked if we are charging simulcast at any locations right now, simulcast success fees. And the answer to that is no, we are not. And we've actually recently announced that we won't for the remainder of the year. And we'll obviously address that as we move forward. We'll keep an eye on it. But right now, where we are from a COVID perspective, it's been an area where we think, it's important to make sure that as people get used to this new environment, we give some leeway where we can. So thank you for that question. I'm going to push this one over to Mark Ford. So Mark, Tommy Gordon did mention while Alan was talking that we're still short-staffed with respect to technicians and arbitrations, seeing some delays on the auction side with regards to arbitrations. I wonder if you could kind of give some insight in regards to our approach there and areas where we're working to tighten up in that space.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Yeah, definitely in Florida, we've really looked at addressing it holistically for like the whole Southeast region under Ed Molina, who's just done a phenomenal job, and making sure that we have enough people covering the locations and that we have the the mechanics and the mechanic shop managers looking at the vehicles to make sure that they're being covered. So if there's an issue at a certain location or an area that Ed can look at, or myself, or any one of the RVPs, we gladly like to hear about it and see if we can address it.
Pete, it's Alan. I would add specifically for technicians, Tommy, and listen, it's no industry secret. It is a challenge. We are constantly looking to hire more technicians. We've rolled out apprentice programs to try to train some of our existing staff to become technicians. We're working with trade schools, you name it. We're throwing the bank at it, and I think it's just a matter of a industry-wide problem. But know that it is a focus point, as important as things like condition reports for us to be able to get qualified folks in there to evaluate the vehicles. And I think as we go through this, it's one of these things we're just going to have to face and solve that problem, and know that it is a focus point. We do have design programs, and hopefully we'll see some more traction in that area as far as staffing up for a lot of holes that we do recognize we have in that area.
Awesome, Alan. And I'm going to ask Tim Janago to jump in here real quick. We have a question here about communication from a buyer perspective when buying digitally, how we can communicate with the block. So Tim, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that concept. We do see Brad's mentioning that it is something utilized elsewhere in the industry.
So if you're talking specifically as far as in communication during the sale, again, we have the remote block clerks, but we are having more of our team members visible in the auction arenas on sale day, even though that we have limited in-lane bidding. I'm not sure if that's where we're headed with the question, Pete.
Yeah,
I'm not able to see it on the screen.
If I'm getting what Brad's saying is, if he's actively bidding on a car, there's a desire to have some form of communication with the block, and it doesn't identify, but I wonder if it's that opportunity to try to connect with the seller, kind of near the end of that sale if the reserve hasn't been met. So maybe that's something we can kind of take away, get in touch with Brad on down the road and get some recommendations on what his thoughts and how he's applied that in the past.
Yes, and I'll also touch on that we are working very similar to in several of the regions as far as piloting a trade desk for individual locations and for additional support. Again, certain locations might have 2 or 3 team members that are in the dealer services area or in the commercial side, where we have groups of team members from other locations that are able to view different offers, more of an offer settlement inside the system that can follow up on those also. So, but absolutely, we'll get the information and then I can reach out directly to Brad.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tim. And I think we're kind of through some of those questions. If you have any, we do have a couple more moments. I'll take this minute while we wait for some to come through just to say, for any of you, as we start to prepare on our end and reach out to our employees and at our auction locations and across our organization, for any of you who are in kind of the path of the storm that we're expecting to hit here, we obviously want to let you know that our thoughts are with you all as you hunker down. I know there's some pretty challenging storms coming through, and we obviously want to make sure everybody's as safe as possible. This year's certainly thrown its fair share at us, so why wouldn't we see some strong storms as we roll through hurricane season? So our thoughts are with you. We're gonna do everything we can to protect our team members, and hopefully, if there's any way we can help you out, we'd be happy to as well. And Mark Wanamaker has a question. Oh, it looks like a comment. And thank you, Mark. Mark appreciates our open and honest approach here. And I think you kind of summed up really what we want to accomplish here, Mark. This has definitely been unique for all of us, and we're thankful we had the tools to offer to get through even the most challenging times. But we also recognize that, the business has been very strong the last couple months, and that's probably done us all, dealer and auction house alike, some favors to allow us to catch up to some of the challenges we faced. But we want to make sure as much as possible that one, there's a venue for you and your peers and our clients out there to truly understand where we're headed, not just where we are. Additionally, I think it's important. We use the word partnership quite a bit, and I know that's a word that can be thrown around, but we truly do want to build partnerships as opposed to just being a vendor. And without consistent and constant communication, that's nearly impossible to do. So my hope is that beyond this call, we're meeting your needs from your sales rep is meeting your needs. Our auction locations are. We do and want to say we are absolutely open to the to feedback, and I know sometimes it may not materialize as fast as possible, or in some cases it may not be something we can deliver on, but we need to hear it consistently and constantly. So thank you for that comment, and I appreciate that you appreciate the purpose of these calls. So I'm going to jump onto one more comment by Peter Klein here, and Peter says, the market, instead of headlining the market, it's peaked. It seems to be more informative to talk about two segments, near new and older vehicles, and it's a tale of two segments. And I think that's a good point. We gave a lot of information in here that pertain to off lease, which clearly is going to skew towards the newer side and has its own completely separate factors that drive it. And then when you start getting into that older segment, you start to see other things that will really impact it, like repossessions and things like that. So I think maybe I'll take that as just some good feedback, Peter, that will approach those things and probably spend a little bit more time on the older and speak a little less broadly about the market as a whole. We have seen them respond differently. The unique connection has been that demand has continued to be high in both segments and supply has been low, and I think that's been our main focal point. But as we do move forward into the next coming months and into 2021, we can absolutely expect the economic impacts to be different in those segments. So we'll make sure that for our next call, should you join us, we'll kind of dive into those a little bit more specifically. With that said, thank you all. We're right at 3 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. As I said a minute ago, please stay safe if you're in the storm path. If not, hopefully, if you're not in that path, you have a wonderful week at your lots, and honestly, personally as well. And we thank you for joining us. Hope everybody has a wonderful day.